Welcome to the Venue RX podcast, where we provide a prescription of tips, tools, hacks, and interviews to improve your wedding venue. If you are looking to start, improve, or maximize your wedding venue, this is the place for you. Make sure to subscribe and follow along wherever you listen to podcasts as we delve into the wild world of weddings. We hope you get a lot of value from this episode, and now we'd like to introduce our hosts, Tim Wyrick and Jonathan Amon.
All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the first podcast that Tim Wyrick and I are doing together. And we are so excited. My name is Jonathan. I am your co-host and host. Tim and I are going to be going back and forth on this, and we are really, really excited about launching the Venue RX podcast. This is something that we've been working on for quite a while now, and Tim, thank you for being here. Thank you for collaborating on this with me. How are you today?
Dude, I'm up really early. And I was waking up this morning. I was thinking, these are the moments when legacies, when generational wealth, these are the moments when things are really, truly created, is when you get up at the butt crack of dawn, or in your case, before dawn is even considered waking up. No, dude, I'm super excited to be here and work with you. I know, like you said, we've been trying to get something together for quite some time now, and I feel like this is going to be fantastic. So thank you as well for being a co-host slash host slash entrepreneurial spirit.
My pleasure. Well, I have taken so much of my example from you. And, as you're listening to this, if you're out there, wherever you're listening to it, Tim and I both are coming into the event space, into the venue space from different angles, but really with a lot of the same mindset, and our shared passion on events and specifically venues has led us to creating this podcast. And so I've actually, you're going to hear some of our story come through this podcast, but I've looked up to Tim for quite some time. I literally do look up to him. We'll talk about that later. But, I've looked up to him as a business person, as someone who is very much a pioneer, in my opinion, in the industry, and ran and founded a very, very successful brand of wedding venues. And so I'm excited to get into your brain and to learn a lot as we unpack the episodes here. So, if you're listening at home, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed, because the content that we have coming out, it's going to be engaging. It's not only going to be educational, but it's also going to be funny, and we hope entertaining. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
I remember the first time you called me, I was in line at a Starbucks, and it was my former director of venue operations, and she's like, "Hey, I talked to this guy. We've been using his services for quite some time, and Jonathan's been in the created a staffing company," which I think was mind-blowing, because, as you know, people are the crux of every business, and the fact that you just dove right into the people part of it was like mind-blowing to me, and then to be successful at it. So I was like, well, if a guy can do that and still be excited about this industry, then by all means, I want to talk to him. And I just remember, like, it was vaguely over the conversation and what we talked about, but always appreciated what you did and what you've been doing. And I respect you and look up to you in that regard, because I love working with people, but as we know, people can be your greatest asset or your greatest liability. So when you found a way to kind of, quote unquote, master that component, I was like, I got to meet this guy and talk to him and see what he's all about. And like you said, I feel like we're very aligned in how we approach things, even though it's from completely different perspectives. So,
well, and thank you so much for that, Tim. I don't know about mastering it, but definitely, being the best cat herder I can. Always dynamic, always something new. But, you and I are members of the incredible and slightly crazy group of individuals who call the wedding and events business our careers and our industry, and I think we would like to think that, we dabble in a bunch of different industries, but really, the crux of what we do for venues, for staffing, it's all about weddings and events. And there is quite a amazing, but I would say crazy group of people that are willing to spend their Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, helping other people party. And so, Tim, how did you get into this? Just as a bit of a background, did you, love events, weddings? I mean, what channeled you to start being involved in this industry?
Well, it was kind of by accident. So, I mean, as most careers often start. So I've always been somewhat, call it artistic. I love to paint and draw. Actually went to college, majored in graphic design with a minor in art. So two very unrelated fields to what we do now. But it did teach me how to build websites and the marketing component, which I fell in love with. And I've always been kind of an entrepreneur from the beginning. So when I graduated, the first thing I did was move out to San Diego from California or from Kansas, and worked about 12 different jobs over the next couple of years until I got laid off in the financial crisis of 2008 and launched a photography studio. I did some simple math and said, hey, if I can make X number of dollars on a weekend photographing a wedding, that's a pretty good living. So jumped right into the wedding photography business.
And I want to interrupt you just really quick. So many people wouldn't make that jump. I can start a wedding photography business. That takes an eye, like you said, for design, but certainly an eye for what looks good in pictures. Had you dabbled before with photography, or was this completely new to you and you just kind of jumped right in?
It was the first time I tried to make money off of photography. So, digital photography in high school, and I took a film photography in high school, and then digital in college, just to date myself a little bit there. I've always wanted to do art, but trying to make a living doing art was, next to impossible. And so the only thing that I could really make sense of was weddings are somewhat expensive, and looking at what photographers were making, it made sense to at least pursue it and ask questions and see if it became a reality. But it was also one of the scariest experiences I've ever had. Was my first wedding, showing up and no idea what I'm doing. And fortunately, it was for a friend of mine. And I basically said, listen, I'm not even going to charge you, because if I screw this up, I don't want to have any sort of responsibility. I think I took like 30,000 pictures, something ridiculous that day. I had someone just dumping CF cards, and they weren't like the 12 or 16 or 24 or 32 gig cards like you have today. They're like 2 gigabyte cards. So
you're just swapping them out.
Say what?
You're just swapping them out.
Yeah, man. Like 10 of them just rotating, and they couldn't dump it fast enough for me to keep out and go into shooting. So, but it worked. I had a ton of fun. And then that's when I realized, weddings are a lot of fun. You have all the drama before and sometimes the drama after, but for the most part, everybody's there to celebrate and have a good time, which makes it fun for us, obviously, as business owners. And then to be the one responsible for capturing it and making sure they can remember that. People are always going to think about you when they look at their wedding photos, and hopefully they're grateful in a positive way. But it just kind of took off from there. And that's when I realized customer service is a huge component of weddings. And if you can, really engage with the customer, then it makes sense to, keep pushing forward and photograph more weddings, because they're going to refer you, and they're going to refer you, and they're going to refer you. So
I was going to say, I feel like many vendors that I've met, venue owners, many people in this space are in this space because they really do enjoy helping people have fun. They do enjoy a component of the customer experience. They do really enjoy creating that special moment for someone. And so I think that the community...
They're not going to be there very long.
Oh, yeah, seriously. And there are definitely people that kind of go in and out in phases. I think we've seen, how long have you been in the industry now? Just weddings and events? 10 years?
2007. So about 13 years.
13 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm on 8 years. So you're the senior here for sure.
Older, wiser.
And I have more gray in my beard, I think.
I don't think so. No, we're not even going to try that argument. I had to shave it because it was that bad. So
I love it. Well, today we are talking about venues. We're just going to get started right there. And, a big topic in the wedding and event space is, how do you scale your business? So many different people are solopreneurs. So many people, they start out as photographers, maybe there's a first and second shooter, but it's really hard to scale past that. And as a venue owner, there are many people that own just one venue, or they own one property and they convert part of it into a venue. And so on this podcast specifically, as we're going through it, we're going to be talking about how to make a profitable venue, how to really scale your operations, how to tackle some of those points of the industry that will make your business more fun to run, certainly, and more profitable, because it's good to make money. And then we're going to just talk about some of those tips and tools that you're going to need. So today we're going to be talking about venues and the topic of, should you build a venue from the ground up, or should you buy an existing building and convert it into a wedding venue? And I think both of us have been on both sides of this,
Oh, yeah.
but just your hot take right from the get-go. What side of this are you
Dude,
on?
uh, dude, you're seriously, you can't pick a side. Like there's so
I'm,
many pros and cons to either one. If I had to choose, I'm excited to build, and control the entire process from the ground up. That's fun, but you are going to miss out on that uniqueness and that character that only comes with age in a building, which is remodeling, and that's been a huge part of what I enjoyed in the past was remodeling those buildings. So, but either one comes with headaches. Either one comes with a lot of upside. So, what about you? What's yours?
I'm definitely on the other side of the spectrum here. And I think I was anticipating your answer a little bit because we've played around a little bit with this discussion, but I think it's a really important discussion because as a new venue owner, it would be easy to think, should I go out and find a contractor? Should I raise the money, find a plot of land that makes sense? Do my research, of course, and just build it from the ground up, build it for a venue purpose, which to your point is an incredible idea. Or should you find an existing building and, kind of retrofit it in a way? And I'm on the other side of that. I feel like when you're able to find a building that maybe already has some of the permits, that already has some of the traffic, that already has some of those things in place that you don't have to consider, that it's easier to make money from day one. But it also, you do have to customize the building a little bit more. You do have different things. So let's unpack this a little bit. In your experience, what is the biggest headache in building a venue, in constructing it from the ground up?
Getting started. Honestly, that's where I think the biggest difference comes into play is when you're building something from the ground up, you have a lot more work on the front end, as opposed to when you're leasing a building and remodeling it. Like you said, you're going to have a little more work on the back end. And I feel I'd rather take on the bulk of the work at the beginning. But one of once you get the idea and concept on paper, it becomes a lot easier to tell that story. And like you said, there are advantages to, leasing a building that's already existing, is you can start touring and showing the space before it's even ready to go. Whereas, it's kind of hard to show somebody a piece of land and say, all right, you want to get married here? There's a lot of vision that, has to take place. And unfortunately, it's a very difficult task. So, I think the beginning and getting started of building is probably the hardest part. But once you get those renderings and the floor plans and the story starts to formulate, I think you have a much more grounded story that people can relate to. But, and to the other side, like I said, you go a hell of a lot faster when you just lease a building and talk to a landlord, and the capital costs are significantly less. But at the same time, it also depends on what market you're in. There's so many variables to consider when you're trying to decide which route you want to go. And that's where I really am excited about this, because there really, I don't think is a right or wrong decision. It's what's right for you and the market and your clients. And I think that's what really should be the biggest driver in whether or not you pursue it.
Well, and let's talk about clients and vision. You said you could tour the space when you have an existing building, whereas, if you just have a plot of land, it's a little bit harder, right? You can go and show them the renderings and show them some of the plans. Have you had experiences with some of the venues that you have operated where you booked them from renderings, or did you have to have? Okay, so tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was part of the strategy. So let's unpack it. When you lease a building, there are certain terms you can negotiate with your landlord. So everything from a tenant improvement allowance or a TIA, essentially your landlord's going to give you money to improve their building. Now, to be totally honest, they're not giving you money. You're just paying for it over the length of your lease. But at the same time, it's not cash out of pocket. So when that happens, you can go in and start to get 3D renderings and models and pictures of the space before it's even done. And then you get we would print out pictures and say, okay, here, put this on an easel, walk the clients through and be like, all right, this is what that, spot is going to look like before and after. So they can kind of see and start to envision what's happening. And I think that's where we were pretty strategic, because the other part of the equation with the landlords is you can get free rent. So you're not paying rent for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 months of your lease term. So you want to take as much opportunity as you can and really seize the chance of free rent, because that's just all income that you're going to be generating at that point. So while you're remodeling the building, you've got the pictures up, you're not paying rent. You walk a client through it and you're like, hey, this is the space, let's do this. You really want to get that deposit right away, because that's 6 months, 18 months out before that event's going to happen. So I think there's a pretty significant advantage. And we were very gung-ho about trying to, get in there as soon as possible and start. And even before we signed leases, like as soon as we signed the lease, we had all the renderings and the documents ready to go, because we wanted to hit the ground running.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you, when you're approaching a landlord with your idea, your concept, right? You have your business plan, you've done, some preliminary research, and you're saying, all right, this is what we'd like to do. This is what we'd like to rent the space for. In your experience, do you get a lot of pushback from landlords because there maybe in the commercial space is a negative connotation behind, you're going to have all these people consistently in the space, partying, music, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously it's situational depending on, where the building's actually located, but in frequently, what were your findings?
Every landlord was different. And this is where, to unpack even more, you have different types of landlords. You've got your professional landlords who own multiple buildings. You've got your landlord who just owns this building because they inherited it. You have banks that own buildings. So it really depends on the landlord that you're talking to. I can tell you, dealing with the banks was the most difficult, trying to get your vision, and because there's no emotion in the transaction, whereas a small business owner and just happens to own a building, they love the idea because they've been to a wedding, and they their building could be a wedding venue is just very exciting to them. But they're so, not all of them, but they tend to be uneducated on the traditional terms. Like, oh, okay, I'd love to have this be a wedding venue, but you want me to give you $400,000 to make it a wedding venue? Like, that's not happening. And so they don't see the benefits and the upsides, whereas the bank is more willing to give you money, but they're a little more hard to convince of the vision. So I think it really depends on what the building is and the type of landlord. But that was, you're right. It's definitely, people associate weddings with getting drunk and partying. It's totally. Basically, once the ceremony, it's like, okay, now you're going to have 300 drunk people in my building. Like, that's a risk.
Yeah, huge hazard.
As you know, it's not always the case. Now, you do have your one-off events where one or two people get a little rowdy, but for the most part, and in my experience, we never had something more extravagant than one. I think it was a groomsman just kind of overreacted to a situation. So, and that was about the extent of our craziness that we had. So just, making the owner or the landlord feel comfortable. You are experienced, you've been to a lot of weddings, you've seen a lot of weddings, you've been in the wedding industry for some time. That really helped. But when we tried to first get our first venue off the ground, it was a shitload of work. Mm-hmm. I did presentation after presentation after presentation after conversation, just getting them comfortable with the idea, until finally, like, I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks, and I sent one last deck. I was like, hey, here's the numbers, here's why it makes sense, what can we do to get into this thing? And we had to have some concessions to make that happen. Like, I didn't have a tenant improvement allowance in our first building. So that was, obviously scary, because I was up on a ladder painting all the windows myself. But wow. As you got, so.
That's incredible. So you're in some of those cases, it sounds like, especially when you're dealing with existing businesses, and this is kind of what we're talking about with the dichotomy between the two different models, you have more of a burden to discuss it and maybe convince the building owner or the person who's going to be, leasing you, or whatever the situation is, whoever is in charge of that specific building. You're really going to have to probably help educate them, right, on what you're trying to use the space for, and that maybe $400,000 is super, super reasonable, right, for what you're trying to do with the space, and they're going to, see the investment back over the amount of time that you're planning on leasing it. So I think that's really, really interesting. It sounds like that is a huge difference right from the get-go between that and finding a plot of land to build, because at that point you're just saying, hey, I'd like to build this. I'm going to pull these different permits. In your experience with permitting, is it a really, really, really challenging process for some newbie venue owners, someone who's, looking at a plot of land? Is it just crazy hard? Time?
No, it's all available online, and it's patience. That's what's hard about it, is you have to be incredibly patient. The good thing about codes is that they're very much to the letter. And there are ways to work the system and take advantage of that. So, for example, if you put kitchen on your floor plans, you automatically trigger the food and health department. So they're going to come and say, but if you call it a break room, it doesn't trigger that. So you just change the label on your plans. And those are some of the little nuances that you figure out over time. Like, don't put kitchen on there if you're not going to be doing catering, because it's going to trigger all these other codes that you have to regulate, and dealing with sewage and stuff like that. It just gets really, really expensive. So
that's huge. See, I would put 2 kitchens. I'd have 2 kitchens on my floor plan. Right. And that's awesome.
So, I mean, yeah, but it's all online. It just takes patience and understanding. And sometimes you're reading through legalese and verbiage that you have to look up every other word to totally understand what they're saying. It's not impossible. And if you look at it, I mean, there are so many businesses and buildings out there that do this on the regular. And there are people that can help you. There's what do we call them? Code consultants who know the code inside and out and know kind of how to navigate those waters, because sometimes these codes are ancient and sometimes they're not even written. So when you go into a city, it's like, well, this is what it should be because this is what it was like in this city, even though you don't have that, specific clause or something in there.
Talking about ancient city codes, it just made me laugh. There's I guess a code in the area that we live in. I believe it was just repealed, overturned, something like that, where basically and it was from a long time ago. So it's just absolutely hilarious how terrible and how sexist it was. You're gonna die. You're gonna die. Check this out.
Okay.
You couldn't have 5 women living in a house at the same time, or it was considered maybe a brothel or I am not kidding with you.
Wait,
at
in
all.
your specific complex right now?
No, the city that we live in.
Oh.
And they just did, because it's a college town.
Yeah.
This is a college town. So, I mean, there are so many, groups of young women
sororities,
who are
seriously.
Yeah, it's nuts. So I recently got turned on to this because I was talking with some folks in the city for a project, and it was just like, this is hilarious that there are these things, but sometimes they just don't get, repealed or I mean, what is it when you take a code, you get rid of a code?
Yeah, something like that.
Delete.
Modified. Yeah.
Think. Anyway, super, super interesting, but hilarious side note there that made me think of that. But
what triggered that knowledge in your, were you Googling or what?
No, just literally I was talking with someone down at the city, and we were talking about codes and how the codes aren't necessarily always the most sensible or current, and that was just kind of a funny thing. They're like, actually, did you know that we just recently overturned a code that was laughable? But and I think there are, in different parts of the country, there's funny examples of that.
So what would you do in this situation now that you? I guess,
well, thanks for asking, Tim.
What would be your thought?
So my perspective on it is, I don't have as strong of a background as you do with building venues from the ground up. And as we were talking in the beginning, it really depends on the person, on the environment, who your clients are, and some of those things. And so I would naturally, just based on that as a disclaimer, I would naturally tend to gravitate more towards finding an existing building that had already had, the codes, that had already kind of had those use permits that I could go in and just start working right away, that I didn't really have to do too much extra work. Minor tenant improvements, no problem at all. Some design stuff, not a big deal. But then if you're actually building it, I would tend to be a little bit more reticent to undertake that, because I do feel like it would be harder to convince someone to, imagine basically their wedding, one of the most special days of their life on this plot of land, that has yet to be developed. And obviously it takes a good design team and all of that, but I feel like you could pretty much from right away, day one, like you said, start booking weddings. And, I've recently taken a venue that wasn't even completed yet, still in the process of being completed, but, in a matter of 18 days, I think, with myself and our team being involved on the project, got them their first booking. And that's because, they can see the structure, they can see everything set up. And so I know that I can start generating revenue from day one. And I think that's really extremely important if you have investors, if you have partners, if you have payroll, right? Someone, people on your team who are relying on on you to kind of keep that going. So managing cash flow is really, really important. And that's something that I picked up running the staffing company. Just managing cash flow, it was both our biggest problem and maybe our greatest strength simultaneously, because it was constantly kind of pushing us to manage better. And yeah, so for me, I really like being able to walk into the space and book it right away. And also, I think that there is a fun component of transitioning the space and allowing some of the history of the space that you're in to breathe through and influence the theme and kind of the brand of the venue, because it's not frequent that people go out and they spend thousands of dollars renting a space out.
Yeah.
And so to have that theme and to have that, if it's a old tire factory or a bread shop or like random stuff, but when it can be cool and different and unique, I think that really sets you apart from other venues. And I think actually, Tim, something I've really looked up to the different venues that you've owned and operated, they're always unique and they're always influenced in some ways by the surrounding, environment, the geography, the local history. And that to me is so cool, because especially for guests out of town, they're getting a little bit of a history lesson as well. They're getting a little bit of a piece of the culture of the city. And I love that. I think when you're mixing both of those, it adds a lot of depth to the experience. So
absolutely. And I mean, we would call it character, and you can, but it's very hard to instill character into a new building. And that's one of the struggles that my wife and I, as we were designing our venue, is how do we get that genuine character feeling, kind of fabricate that from the beginning. Whereas one of my favorite things, like you said, in all the buildings that we remodeled, was pulling out some of that raw character of that building, exposing the brick or the wooden columns that were, holding up the building, not like having it front and center, but like little nooks and crannies that were kind of, secretive and really tell the story. And you're right. I mean, that's one of the best parts about working with older buildings is you have that opportunity. The other side, and this is where I'm going to burst your bubble a little bit, is whether you want to build a building or remodel a building, you're going to be learning the codes. Yeah. So there's no way around that unless you pay someone just to go for and decipher what you're trying to do and be like, all right, these are the codes you're going to hit. Which, your architect, your engineer, your contractor, everybody should be able to, or should be somewhat familiar. But like getting into a building that's been classified as an office space, converting it to assembly use, which is what most venues are, is a very laborious process. And that's where a lot of the codes get triggered and start to change on you. For instance, one of our venues, it had the occupancy of either 5, 10, or 15 people per square foot. And they classified us as 15 people per square foot, and not per square foot, something ridiculous, per square meter. Like basically we could have 3,000 people in this building. And we were like, whoa, that's not anywhere we need to be. But what that did was we had to have 27 restrooms, 27 stalls to accommodate that. And we were like, we will never have a wedding in here that we need 27 bathrooms. Like, this is ridiculous. So
just come in, half the building is restrooms.
Yeah. Like you got 8,000 square feet and you just spent $4,000 on plumbing and bathrooms. It's just like, holy shit, what the hell happened here? So not to burst your bubble too much, but that's how I learned it, was just going in and modifying these buildings and be like, oh, well, that triggered this. And then it changes city to city. So it's fun, it's challenging, but that's part of the puzzle and part of, being patient and understanding where you want to go. So, but I agree. If you're someone that is, call it inexperienced in owning a wedding venue, I would look to lease a building. I definitely think that that's the faster path to success. You're going to have a shitload of headaches either way. Probably more so if you're trying to lease an existing building because you're trying to reconfigure something. But that's where I like the challenge of building something from the ground up, because I can control, where the restrooms are and how many restrooms I need, and make sure that the flow of the entire space makes sense. And you can solve that piece of the puzzle, right away. And then once.
It makes me think of Legos. When you first start out building Legos, you start with the instruction manual, right? And it comes in the kit and it's like, put this piece here, and you're kind of working through the actual diagram. But then when you're done, you deconstruct the whole thing and you build something that's possibly different. You add some other pieces from other things. And so
Yeah.
you're probably at the point where actually building something from the ground up, you know which pieces you're going to have to use for which part of this
Yeah.
new structure you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a good point. So for anyone out there listening, I think it sounds like both of our advice is to
Start
lease,
playing with Legos.
start playing with Legos, do it right away. But yes, I mean, doing that leasing um, option is maybe better because you're going to learn some of the codes, you're going to learn some of the
Yeah.
things, but you're dealing with existing matter instead of having to create something entirely brand new. So,
Well, and I mean, you're not even talking about the risk and the liability component. I mean, if it's not your building, technically you're going to be very limited in what you can do, but that also protects you. So, and that's where you get into some of the nuances of, dealing with HVAC systems and fire sprinklers and plumbing components, where you can put some of that on the landlord, and it's going to be their dollar to make sure that the building can be functional. Because when you're leasing a building, and I've got a guy that I could recommend in San Diego he's a tenant rep. He knows these nuances of what you're looking for and what you need to ask when you talk to the landlord. So if you're going to lease a building, find a solid broker. If you need one in San Diego, his name's Jamal Brown. He's fantastic. But
shout out to Jamal Brown.
Yeah, threw that out there for you, Jamal. But the nice thing is, like, if the building has to have this done to accommodate any tenant, usually that's a landlord responsibility. So,
Okay.
Plumbing systems, the electrical, all of that usually falls on the landlord. But once you start to modify and tweak that, then it becomes your responsibility because it's for your use. So do as much negotiating as you can with the landlord on the front end, and try to put as much responsibility on them, because that's just dollars out of your pocket that you're going to be spending later. So that's, sorry, one more kind of there for you.
I love it. Well, and that's a wonderful segue to the next part of this. We've got two more parts coming up, and this one is the hot tip section. And so, Tim, I'm going to put you in the hot seat, and I want to ask you, we're talking about building versus, using an existing venue space in either scenario. And let's take the leasing an existing building scenario, right? When you're leasing an existing building and you're going to pursue opening a wedding venue in that method, where would you give someone advice to start? Brand new venue owner listening to this podcast right now, would you focus on marketing? Would you start reading all sorts of code? Would you, get really concerned about the liability and go get a massive insurance policy? Where would you start? Hot tip.
Dude, the best tip I can give you, like, honestly, is just to start. Like, it doesn't really matter where, because everything's going to lead you to one path. I would definitely understand your market, though. I would talk to the other venues, try to do tours, try to develop those relationships, because as you get into it, the wedding industry is very niche. It's very it's a select group of people, and it's very collaborative, or it can be very combative, and you want to be collaborative. So I would suggest starting with those relationships. Even if it's a photographer or a florist or a coordinator or another venue, have that conversation. What's the industry like here? What are some of your pains? What are some of your struggles? What are some of the highlights? And then really kind of start to figure out what other venues are around.
Let's unpack that really quick.
Sure.
Are you saying, here I am, Jonathan, I want to open a new venue. Should I go to other venues and say, hi, I'm the new kid on the block, I want to open a venue? Or would you do research a little bit more covertly?
Honestly, I don't think I would hesitate to reach out to a venue and tell them there's enough weddings to go around, and as a venue, you have a limited amount of inventory. So it's not like you can sell 1,000 days a year. You only have 365, potential wedding days. So I think, depending on the venue and the owner, and they're not going to give you their trade secrets and tell you like this and this and this, but saying, hey, I'm interested in starting a wedding venue also. Can I pick your brain on how you kind of started? And most people are very open to sharing that information, and helping you, because it can be very collaborative. And then there's opportunities, because as in Denver, they have a venue network, actually, which I absolutely love, where if you have a date that you're already booked, but you have an inquiry, you can send that inquiry with permission from the customer to all of the other venues. And if they are open, they can say, hey, client, we're open if you want to come by and check out a tour. So it becomes collaborative, and you're helping the client, you're helping other venues, and in turn, they're going to help you because you're going to have availability. So you want that
That's
referral
huge.
network to come back. And that's where it's like, that's the epitome of how classic collaboration can work within this industry. So, when you try to be sneaky and do cold calling or sending inquiries to try to get information, I get it. It's done. We've had it done to us. No big deal. But honestly, I think you're going to get a much better feedback and much more honest candor from those venue owners or the venue managers or from the people working there day in and day out that, yeah, this is where we struggle. This is where things go well. This is how we got started. This is what we would do different next time. And they're usually very open to helping. I know everybody who ever asked me, I was very open. I remember having conversations on plane rides with people that were like, "Oh, I want to start something up in San Francisco, and you own wedding venues." I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, how'd you do this?" And it's like, "Well, this is what I would do moving forward." But so I would say, having those conversations and being kind of upfront about it.
Definitely.
You don't have to give them every detail of your plan, like you're going to start a rustic champagne ballroom, with massive chandeliers, but getting the idea or the general
Just
idea out there.
being general enough.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said that you kind of briefly touched on, obviously, in saying is that this industry is very niche. It can be very combative, or it can be very collaborative. And I think that you kind of briefly mentioned that, but I really, just in my experience, which obviously pales a little bit in comparison to your experience, but
Comes to venues, but
yeah, in my experience, it's really true. And I don't think that we could say that enough. If you're someone new looking to get into this industry, developing those relationships is absolutely huge. And I think it can be one of those things that'll really make or break your business. And, of course, it's important to actually have a good product or service, whatever you're offering, right? You can't just go to all the networking meetings and drink, tons of cups of coffee and develop relationships without actually doing something. But at the same time, really having those relationships, nurturing those, finding the movers and shakers in your industry, people who you can learn from, and maybe who can even be a mentor to you, will absolutely be invaluable. And, I know I owe so much of the progress in the industry I've made to several different vendors, who've been willing to kind of, give me some advice or get on the phone with me or, talk a little shit to me, right? And say, hey, this is, not working out, and just listening to the feedback that you're getting from your clients, especially if they're in the industry, is huge.
Well, and as everybody knows, like, business is a lot about networking, whether you want to admit it or not. So and that's where I'm like, don't even just talk to other venue owners, talk to photographers, talk to coordinators, because they have a vast network usually. And they're usually willing to share that. And so just imagine, like, before you even get your venue off the ground, you've got almost every other vendor in the industry excited about your venue. Like, they're going to be pushing for you. And not only that, they're going to be telling their clients and future clients, like, hey, I heard that there's going to be this new venue coming up next year. If you're not in a hurry, or et cetera, like, tell your sister who's 2 years younger, when she's getting married, that she get married at that venue. So it's just like getting the word out and being positive and collaborative just goes so far in this industry. And it's a very emotional industry as well, both on the client and the vendor side. So you have to have some resilience and patience when it comes to that. But in the end, if you're about helping your customer, your client, which everybody seems to value to the most extent possible, that's what everybody cares about. And everybody's looking out for their guests and their clients. And then you start to look out for the other vendors because you want their experience to be great with you too. So it's just, and that's where I would start. That's my tip, is just get to know your local, vendor network, and start buying people cups of coffee, and have those conversations. And the nice thing is they're usually pretty open on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, because they have to work on the weekends. So
there you go. And from anyone coming from the restaurant industry, like I did, those Tuesdays, Wednesdays around 2-3 o'clock, they are wide open spots for conversations about, pretty much anything, where they're trying to get a job or whatever. Those are kind of the wide open spots. But awesome. Okay, great hot tip. Let's move to the lightning round, and we are really excited about bringing on incredible guests. And today, obviously, it's, just you and I, Tim, but we are going to have some really incredible guests. We already have a couple different ones lined up. And so again, if you are not subscribed, consider supporting us by subscribing and continuing with us along this journey. Today, Tim is in the hot seat. He's going to be answering the lightning round questions. And he didn't even know. You look
No,
at
I
his
did not
face.
know that. And this is not what we discussed.
Yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
not.
All right.
Nope.
All right. Let's do it.
After the recording comes off, Tim's going to make me cry. But no, so just a couple of different questions. We're going to go real general. I'll throw you a softball, right away, just to kind of get us warmed up here. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite business book that has helped you grow as a business owner, not a venue owner, a business owner?
I think the 4-hour work week really shifted my mentality on how to approach work in general.
Okay.
It's not necessarily about getting your work week down to 4 hours, but really valuing your time and doing what you can with that short amount of compactness to get the most productivity out of it. And then understanding that time is really the only thing that's most valuable and very limited. The only resource that's truly limited is time. So
cool.
I really appreciate the 4-hour work week.
Cool. Awesome. 4-hour work week. You guys heard it. Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss. Yeah.
Check it out if you haven't already. All right. Next question. So if you had a choice between a venue theme, there are many different themes, right? Ranch style. You could have your French ballroom with the hanging chandeliers. You could have your modern industrial, right? What is your favorite theme of a wedding venue?
Whoa. The hotel ballroom. Definitely by far.
The hotel ballroom?
No, absolutely not.
I was like, wait a minute. I mean, I don't know.
The existence of why we started our whole company was because of hotel ballrooms. So, I honestly, I still have a passion for the old industrial kind of raw buildings, the old school, full of character, raw brick, original windows like that. I just love those buildings. And so that's probably my favorite, call it, theme for a venue.
Cool. Industrial. Tim's going industrial. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. On to the next one. Question number 3. If you had a choice and you could only use one of these between these 2 different marketing avenues, which one would you choose?
Okay.
Google ads or Facebook ads?
Facebook.
And this specifically is pertaining to venues.
Yeah, I would say Facebook. I think Facebook is a, and in that also is by region. We had some really good Facebook response versus Google ads, which is a little more broad stroke. And the nice thing about Facebook is even if you hit the wrong audience, it could get to the right audience from them sharing it. So I think there's the extra addition of getting that benefit.
Awesome. Great answer. I would probably agree with you. Also because Instagram is kind of like a sneaky tag along.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
so
I would just do Instagram but that wasn't an option. Like Instagram is such a visual medium, and with venues, you have to be very visual. I think that goes a long ways with people seeing your space and wanting to get in there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. What are we on? 4?
I think so.
I think we're on 4.
This has been
2
so
more.
much fun. I'm not even counting anymore.
All right. Question number 4. Who is the most important person in the conversation about designing the wedding after it's been booked, in your experience?
So from the client's perspective, who's the most important to determining the outcome of the wedding?
Yeah. Who's kind of the person that you may not think is involved, but is always involved?
I think mothers of the bride sometimes are too involved personally, which is why I think you need to have a coordinator.
All the MOBs out there are like,
no, I love MOBs and FOBs. But for the most part, I think there's a lot of influence that comes from the mom to the daughter. Mm-hmm. And you start to see where it's like, listen, this is your wedding. This isn't your mom's wedding. She's had her wedding. Like this is about you and what you want. And I've had that conversations with a couple of brides and grooms. Like, listen, you guys, you're the ones that are getting married and you're the ones that are paying for it. So what do you want? Mm-hmm. And really kind of, help them, give them guidance. Like you're adults now, you're mm-hmm. grown-ups, and you can make these decisions, and your mom is going to love you either way. And she'll show up hopefully. So, and I've had very few instances where it damaged the relationship between the parents, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I can't even think of one where it was just like an odd conversation. They weren't expecting it. And when we were selling our venues, like we were very different. Moms and dad got married in ballrooms and chandeliers, or clubhouses, whereas now you're going to get married in this old warehouse that I can see cobwebs 40 feet up, and doesn't really make sense to me. So it's like,
why are we paying for this? Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
And why am I paying more probably than I would be for that ballroom? So I think that's where they have the most influence. And then next would be coordinators. And I think that's why you get a coordinator, but you and I have disagreements on this. So
we do. And we're going to get into that I'm really excited to talk about that as well. But our final lightning round question is, when thinking about the different vendors that are involved in a wedding, if you were not involved on the venue side, and for you, actually, because we just talked about your background in photography, I want to take the photography off the table, unless really that is it. Which vendor would you be?
Oh, the photographer. The photographer's fun. I'm sorry. Like, it's the only vendor that is pretty much there from the very beginning to the very end, minus the coordinator. But the coordinator has too much responsibility, in my opinion. Which is why I wouldn't want that role. But photographer, you have a lot of influence on the couple, a lot of influence on the day. You're usually considered the most important vendor. So, kind of self-serving. It's like, hey, I'm super important. No, but it's definitely, it was a fun profession. And that's why my wife still does it, is in watching her edit photos, man, it's just, she's so happy when she's editing photos and reliving the moment for the bride and groom, like that night. It's fun. But I think the most important vendor would be photographers. And that's the one that I would do.
That's actually, you're saying that and I'm thinking about it. Between photo and video, you're really creating something as a vendor that lasts longer than anything else.
Oh yeah.
And that just kind of hit me while you were saying that. You're creating content, imagery, video, right, that they're going to keep for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And, in today's format, maybe we're saying that now, it's not like VHSs or whatever else, it's more readily available. We have our phones, we can just look at stuff. So, that's good. Photography. All right.
Yeah.
Tim's going back to his roots.
I don't want to. I really enjoy this part of it. But yeah, no, that's those are some good questions, man. Are we calling it lightning round? Is that what we decided?
Yeah, let's call it lightning round. I just kind of did it on the spot.
Give us feedback if you'd rather it be called like the wedding round or something. But I definitely, I like the idea of the lightning round.
Definitely. Well, and we're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics that interest both myself, Tim, and things that we've consistently heard from other vendors. But it's really important for us, for both of us, I think I can speak for you, Tim, to hear from you. And we would love, whether it's on Instagram, we have an Instagram page, The Venue RX. We are on the web as well. And anywhere that you listen to podcasts, if you could give us some of that feedback, maybe submit questions that you would like us to talk about, answer, feedback that you'd give about the podcast, or things, and maybe even hilarious experiences that you'd like to have us share. We are going to be incorporating different elements of that. So the takeaway from this is, please go follow our Instagram and shoot us a DM if you have some screaming, burning, hot topic question that needs to be talked about. Let us know, because we want to cover that, and we're really excited about this podcast and the way that we can impact the industry with what we're doing here.
Awesome. No, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it for today, friends. Thank you so much for listening. This has been episode number 1 of the Venue RX podcast.
Got it. Make sure to subscribe and follow along wherever you listen to podcasts as we delve into the wild world of weddings.